2 days have passed since I wrote the above. I slept well after writing about my monster, and I still think my explanation is the right one. Anyway, he recedes, and the horror has gone away. Perhaps it did me good to write it all down. I have decided that the footsteps in the attics are rats. Another sunny day. Still no letters. I swam again at the little stony beach, and although the sea was fairly calm, I had the same irritating difficulty getting out of it. I had to climb a steep bank of tumbling, shifting pebbles, while each successive wave was submerging me from behind. Swallowed a lot of water and cut my foot. Found my abandoned pile of driftwood and carried it home. Felt very chilled, but too tired to organize hip bath, which seems to be made of cast iron. Not worth carrying hot water up to bathroom. It has occurred to me that if I attached a rope to the iron banister at the tower steps, I could use the steps even in rough weather. And if I could find anything to tie it to, I could dangle a rope over my cliff to help me out of the water there. I must see if the village shop sells rope. I must also find out where I can get more cylinders of calor gas. My paternal grandfather was a market gardener in Lincolnshire. There, quite suddenly, I have started to write my autobiography, and what a splendid opening sentence. I knew it would happen if I just waited. He lived in a house called Shexton. I thought it was very distinguished to have a house with a name. I do not know what my maternal grandfather did. He died when I was a small child. I think he worked in an office, as indeed my father did too. Doubtless he was some sort of clerk, as indeed my father was too, I suppose, though we never used the word clerk at home. My paternal grandfather had 2 sons, Adam and Abel. He never seemed to me to be an imaginative man, but there was some touch of poetry in those names. It was early evident to me that my uncle, Abel, was more loved and more fortunate than my father, Adam. How does a child perceive such things? Or rather, how is it that they are so perceptible, so obvious to a child, who perhaps, like a dog, reads signs which have become invisible amid the conventions of the grown-up world, and are thus overlooked in the adult campaign of deceit? I knew that my father, who was slightly the elder of the two, was some sort of luckless failure before I knew what failure meant, before I knew anything about money, status, power, fame, or any of those coveted prizes whose myriad forms have led me throughout my life, that dervish dance which is now, I trust, over. And of course, when I say that my dear father was a failure, I mean it only in the grossest, worldly sense. He was an intelligent, good man, pure in heart. My maternal grandparents lived in Carlisle, and I scarcely knew them. My mother's sisters figured as 2 pale aunties, also in Carlisle. My paternal grandmother died young, and in my memories of Shexton she appears as a photograph. Indeed, my grandfather, whom I disliked and feared, appears to me now only as Wellington boots and a loud voice. Adam and Abel crowded my childhood world, dominating it like twin gods. My mother was a separate force, always separate. And then, of course, there was my cousin James, who, like me, was an only child. The ways of the brothers parted. My father drifted into Warwickshire and worked in local government. Drifted. I see him on a raft. Uncle Abel became a successful barrister in Lincoln and lived in a house in the country called Ramsden's, another distinguished place with a name. Ramsden's was larger than Shexton. I still see both those houses in my dreams. Later on, the Uncle Abels moved to London, but kept Ramsden's as what they called their country cottage. Uncle Abel married a rich, pretty American girl called Estelle. I remember her being referred to by my mother as an heiress. My father married my mother, who was working as a secretary on a farm. Her name was Marion. He called her maid Marion. She was a strict evangelical Christian. My father was a Christian too, of course. So was I. So was Uncle Abel, until Aunt Estelle took him away into the world of light. I cannot see my mother as a lovely girl, as the maid Marion of the Warwickshire lanes. I see her face, in my earliest memories, as a mask of anxiety. She was the strong one. My father and I loved and obeyed and comforted each other in secret. Well, we all three loved and comforted each other. We were poorish and lonely and awkward together. I was utterly horrified in the kitchen this morning to see what I took to be a grotesquely huge, fat, fleshy spider emerging from the larder. It turned out to be a most engaging toad. I caught him easily and carried him across the wood to the mossy, boggy pools beyond the rocks. Here he ambled away. How can such gentle, defenseless animals survive? I lingered for a little while after the toad had gone, and looked at the red-tufted mosses and the flowers, mare's tails which I remember from my youth, and that weird yellow flower that catches flies. Heather grows upon the higher ground inland, towards Amorn Farm. I was told by the house agent that there are orchids in the vicinity, but I have seen none. Perhaps they are as legendary as the seals. Later on, I went into the village to buy deep-freeze kipper fillets, the poor man's smoked salmon. Of course, it is quite impossible to buy fresh fish here, as all the villagers tell me with pride. I also made some rather inconclusive inquiries about a laundry. So far, I have washed everything myself, including the sheets, which I lay out to dry upon the lawn. Perhaps I will continue to do this. There is a remarkable satisfaction in the performance of these simple tasks. I forgot to record that I have found a second shop in the village, a sort of ironmonger's, in the row of cottages behind the pub. It calls itself the Fisherman's Stores, and no doubt did once sell gear to the fishermen. This place, I discovered this morning, supplies paraffin and calor gas. I also purchased from them some candles, a new oil lamp, and a length of rope. Carrying these trophies, I dropped into the Black Line on the way home. The bar there falls silent when I enter, and bursts into raucous chatter when I leave, but I propose to make a habit of coming nonetheless. The mild hostility of the villagers does not worry me. Of course, thanks to television, they know who I am, but they have been at pains to exhibit indifference, and indeed, in all their worthy simplicity, they may even be indifferent. For them, I am perhaps something unreal, touched by the unreality of the medium itself. No one, thank God, has attempted to befriend me. For lunch, I ate the kipper fillets rapidly, unfrozen, in boiling water. The sun had done most of the work, garnished with lemon juice, oil, and a light sprinkling of dry herbs. Kipper fillets are arguably better than smoked salmon, unless the latter is very good. With these, fried, tinned new potatoes. No real new potatoes yet. Potatoes are for me a treat dish, not a dull everyday chaperon. Then Welsh rarebit and hot beetroot. The shop sliced bread is less than great, but all right toasted, with good salty New Zealand butter. Fortunately, I like a wide variety of those crackly Scandinavian biscuits, which are supposed to make you thin. Of course they do not. If you are destined to be fat, food makes you fat, but I have never had a weight problem. Now that I own land, I must have a herb garden. A supply of fresh herbs has always been a problem of my life, as an enlightened eater. Of course, the notion of growing herbs never entered my head as a child in my parents' garden. I suspect children cannot understand food. But where am I to put it? I hesitate to dig up either of my little lawns, and anyway, they are rather too close to the sea. If I were to make myself a secret allotment on the other side of the road, would some peasant or animal rob it? I must reflect on these things. Happy and innocent reflections, so unlike the agonizings of the past. After lunch, I cut off a length of my rope and tied it onto the iron banister at the tower steps, and now it trails handily into the sea, moving darkened in the waves. I have knotted the seaward end for easier grasp. I have had less success with the cliff, for the simple reason that there is nothing here to attach the rope to. The rocks are too humpy and smooth, and the rope is not long enough to reach the house. Buy a longer piece and attach it to the kitchen door or to the post at the bottom of the stairs, and haul the long wet end into the kitchen every night. These problems, too, are not without interest. The rope itself is beautiful stuff, lightly burnished and smelling like retsina. I am told it is made locally. I spent part of the afternoon lying upon my rock bridge between the house and the tower, and watching the waves coming flying through beneath me and killing themselves in fits of rage in the deep enclosed rocky area on the inland side. The sight of the rushing, foaming water made me feel, after a while, almost light-headed, as if I might have become giddy and fallen in. Most enjoyable. I am a bit dismayed, however, to find, from studying the picture postcards in the shop, that my bridge and its whirlpool are well-known local features. Fortunately, the cards seemed rather old and crumpled, and I bought up the entire stock for less than £1. I want no trippers here seeking for a beauty spot. In fact, the bridge is nothing much, just a hump of rock with a hole in it and an open pit beyond. At certain states of the tide, the water, forcing itself through, produces a loud, hollow report. I hope this does not draw attention to the place. I learnt from the cards that the enclosed whirlpool is called Min's Cauldron. I asked the shop lady who Min was, but she did not know. Statements made by distant church bells remind me it is Sunday. Today the sky has become cloudy. I have been watching the clouds, and it occurs to me that I have never done this in my life before, simply sit and watch clouds. As a child, I would have been far too anxious to waste time in this way, and my mother would have stopped me. As I write this, I am sitting on my plot of grass behind the house, where I have put a chair, cushions, rugs. It is evening. Thick, lumpy, slate-blue clouds, their bulges lit up to a lighter blue, move slowly across a sky of muddy and yet brilliant gold, a sort of dulled gilt effect. At the horizon, there is a light, glittering, slightly jagged silver line, like modern jewelry. Beneath it, the sea is alive, choppy, lyrical, goldeny brown, jumping with white flecks. The air is warm. Another happy day. "Whatever will you do down there?" they asked. In a quite surreptitious way, I am feeling very pleased with myself. Another day. I have decided not to put dates, as they break up the sense of a continuous meditation. I have been rereading the opening pages of my autobiography. How full, for me at any rate, of frightful resonance those statements are which I have made, with such an odd and sudden air of authority, about my childhood. I had never thought of myself as being that much interested. I had intended to write about Clement. Do I really want to describe my childhood? I have not swum today. I went to the tower steps in the afternoon, intending to swim, but found to my annoyance that the rope which I had fixed to the banister had somehow become untied and floated away. I am not very good at knots. In any case, that rope is perhaps too thick to knot easily. It occurs to me that a long piece of nylon cloth might be more serviceable. Felt a little depressed, but was cheered up by supper. Spaghetti with a little butter and dried basil. Basil is, of course, the king of herbs. Then spring cabbage cooked slowly with dill. Boiled onions served with bran, herbs, soya oil, and tomatoes, with 1 egg beaten in. With these, a slice or two of cold tinned corned beef. Meat is really just an excuse for eating vegetables. I drank a bottle of Retsina in honor of the undeserving rope. It is now late at night, and I am sitting upstairs with one of my old oil lamps and the new lamp. The new one gives a less beautiful light, but it is easier to carry. I must get more of these lamps, though I suppose I shall never be able to dispense with candles. Mrs. Chorney left me about a dozen candlesticks, handy, though not things of beauty, and I have placed these, complete with candles and matches, at strategic positions throughout the house. The smell of the new lamp reminds me of Fritzi. I shall now continue my autobiography. I was born at Stratford-upon-Avon, or to be exact, near it, or to be more exact, in the Forest of Arden. I grew up in leafy central England, as far as it is possible to be in this island from the sea. I did not see the sea until I was 14. Of course, I owe my whole life to Shakespeare. If I had not lived close to a great theatre, indeed close to that great theatre, I would never have managed to see any plays. My parents never went to the theatre. My mother positively disapproved of it. There was little enough spare money for going out anywhere, and we never went out. I did not go to a restaurant until after I left school. I did not enter a hotel till later still. For holidays, we went to Shaxton, or to Ramsden's, or to the farm where my mother had worked as a secretary. I would never have gone to a theatre at all if it had not been that Shakespeare was work. A master at the school was Shakespeare mad. That man, too, made my life. His name was Mr. McDowell. We went to the plays often. We saw everything. Sometimes Mr. McDowell paid for me. And of course, we acted plays too. Mr. McDowell was stage-struck, an acteur manqué. I became his stage-struck pet. It was he who took me, and some other boys, to the sea in Wales for a week. I think this is one of the most important and happy weeks I have ever spent. Happy hardly expresses it. I was nearly insane with joy the whole time. My mother accepted the theatre-going because it was part of my schoolwork. I even cunningly pretended that I did not really enjoy it. It was just necessary for my exam. Wicked, lying little boy. I was in heaven. My father knew, but we would never have confessed to each other that we were deceiving my mother. My father was a quiet, bookish man, and somehow the gentlest being I have ever encountered. I do not mean he was timid, though I suppose he was timid. He had a positive, moral quality of gentleness. I can picture him now so clearly, bending down with his perpetual nervous smile to pick up a spider on a piece of paper and put it carefully out of the window or into some corner of the house where it would not be disturbed. I was his comrade, his reading companion, possibly the only person with whom he ever had a serious conversation. I always felt that we were in the same boat, adventuring along together. We read the same books and discussed them. Children's books, adventure stories, then novels, history, biography, poetry, Shakespeare. We enjoyed and craved for each other's company. What a test that is, more than devotion, admiration, passion. If you long and long for someone's company, you love them. I remember feeling in later life that no one else ever knew how good my father was. I doubt if even my mother knew. Of course, I loved my mother too, but she had a hard line in her where my father had none. She believed in a just God. Perhaps this belief supported her through what may have proved a somewhat disappointing life. The trouble with my parents, at least from my point of view, was that they did not want to go anywhere or do anything. My mother disapproved of going anywhere or doing anything, partly because this involved spending money, and partly because of the worldly vanities which any such removal might lead us to encounter. My father did not want to go anywhere or do anything, partly because my mother was against it, and partly because of his timidity and a certain indolence of character. I may have made it sound as if my father was a sad man, but this was not so. He understood the pleasures of the simple life and how to look forward to little treats. He did his dull office work diligently, I am sure, and did odd jobs about the house with zeal. He enjoyed his reading, which, when he was not partaking in my education, tended to be novels and adventure stories. I can remember him, when he was fatally ill, reading Treasure Island with a magnifying glass. He loved and cherished my mother, and me. And there his world ended. He was not interested in politics or travel, or any form of entertainment, or even any form of art other than literature. He had no friends, except me. It may be mentioned that he liked his brother Abel, though just how much I was never sure. He never entirely got on with my cousin James because he saw him as a rival to me. Aunt Estelle embarrassed him. My mother detested the lot of them, but behaved very well, in spite of it. I went into the theatre, of course, because of Shakespeare. Those who knew me in later years as a Shakespeare director often did not realize how absolutely this God had directed me from the very first. I had, of course, other motives. From the guileless simplicity of my parents' life, from the immobility and quietness of my home, I fled to the trickery and magic of art. I craved glitter, movement, acrobatics, noise. I became an expert on flying machines. I arranged fights. I always took, as my critics said, an almost childish, almost excessive delight in the technical trickery of the theatre. I also took up acting, and was conscious of this too from the beginning, because I wanted to have fun myself, and to procure some for my father. I doubt if he possessed the concept, or ever managed to acquire it later under my eager guidance. In having fun myself, I have throughout my life been fairly consistently successful. I was much less successful in persuading my parents to enjoy themselves. Eventually, I took them to Paris, to Venice, to Athens. They were always thoroughly uneasy and longing to get home, though I think it may later have given them some satisfaction to think that they had been to these places. They really wanted to remain always in their own house and their own garden. There are such people. I was a docile, quiet, loving child, but I knew that a great fight was coming, and I wanted to win it, and win it quickly. I did both. When I was 17, my father wanted me to go to the university. My mother did too, though she feared the expense. Instead, I went to an acting school in London. I obtained a scholarship. Mr. McDowell had not laboured in vain. One of the saddest things in my life was crossing my dear father in this. But I could not wait. My mother was appalled. She thought that the theatre was an abode of sin. She was right. And she thought that I would never succeed and would return home starving. She despised people who could not earn their living. Here she was not right, and at least, as the years went by, she could not help respecting my ability to make money. The theatre then and thenceforth became my home. I even spent the war acting, since a patch on the lung, which cleared up soon after, kept me out of the armed forces. I was rather sorry about this, later on. Mr. Arkwright, do you ever see any very large eels in this vicinity? Direct speech. I record what I said this morning in the Black Lion, where I was buying some of the local cider. The cider is unfortunately too sweet, and I shall before long have exhausted the modest supply of wine which I brought with me. The Black Lion has, of course, never heard of wine, but the intelligent shop lady tells me that the Raven Hotel sells real wine. The Black Lion landlord's name, Arkwright, disturbs me with memories of a chauffeur of that name, whom I once had when I was a grandee, and who regarded me with rancorous hatred. The relation between the chauffeur and the chauffeured can be curiously intense. Black Lion Arkwright is in fact fairly disturbing in his own right. He is a big fellow with long black hair and black whiskers, like a sort of Victorian cad. He leads the bar in the game of embarrassing me. He now analyzes my question. Eels? Large? Very large? Vicinity? Do you mean on land? He asks. He means worms, says one of the clients. The clients are almost always the same. Retired farm laborers, I imagine. No women, of course. I mean eels in the sea. All shake their heads gloomily. Wouldn't see them in the sea, would you? They'd be underwater, someone offers. Someone else adds darkly, eels is no good. The question drops. I return home carrying pointless cider, purchased out of politeness. I have had one success, however. The little upstairs room facing the road, on the inner room and drawing room side, sported a pair of stout cotton curtains. I should add that the corresponding front window on the other side is that of the bathroom. I have cut one of these curtains down the middle, knotted the two ends, and tied this rope onto the iron banister at the steps, thereby enabling myself to have an excellent swim this morning at low tide, even though the sea was choppy. Lunch, frankfurters with scrambled eggs, grilled tomatoes, and a slight touch of garlic. Then shop treacle tart, squeezed with lemon juice and covered with yogurt and thick cream. I drank some of the cider just to spite it. After lunch, I started to make a border around my lawn with the pretty stones which I have collected. I cannot decide whether or not it looks ridiculous. A rather cloudy day and a cool breeze, with a strange coffee-colored light over the sea. Towards evening, the usual cloud show. Great cliffs and headlands of light golden-brown cloud build up to majestic heights, with a froth of pure gold clinging to their huge sides. I tried to light a fire of driftwood in the little red room, but the chimney smoked again. I have been cleaning and tidying up the house. What an extraordinary satisfaction there is in cleaning things. Does the satisfaction depend on ownership? I suspect so. I swept the hall and stairs. I washed the big slate flagstones in the kitchen. Very rewarding. I also washed the big, ugly vase on the landing and polished the battered rosewood table. It was grateful. I started to dust the drawing-room chimney-piece, but some spirit that dwelt therein resisted me. And I have now been polishing the big oval mirror in the hall, which I think I mentioned before. This fine thing, date 1890, is perhaps the best piece in the house. The glass is beveled and somewhat spotted, but remarkably luminous and silvery, so that the mirror seems like a source of light. The frame is made of a dullish grey metal, pewter, and represents a sort of swirling garland of leaves and branches and berries. Metal polish brought a little more luminosity and detail into this metal vegetation. A lot of dirt certainly came off on the cloth. Since I have just spent a little while gazing at myself in this mirror, it is perhaps time to attempt to describe my appearance. This may seem superfluous. Yes, of course, I have been a much photographed man, but the camera has never been entirely my friend. How fortunate that I never wanted to be a film star. Let me describe the real me. I am slim and of medium build. I have an oval face with a short, straight nose and thin lips, and a uniformly fair, fine complexion, which is given to blushing. If annoyed or affronted, I blush scarlet. This habit, which used to worry me, later became a kind of trademark, and when I became known in my profession as a Tartar, it was inadvertently useful in frightening people. My eyes are a rather pale, chilly blue. I wear small, oval, rimless spectacles for reading. I have light, rather colourless, straight, fair hair, not worn long. This, never brilliant, fades and dims, but does not go grey. I have decided not to dye it. A few years ago, when my hair began to recede, I enlisted the aid of science, with entirely satisfactory results. I should say that what the camera fails to catch is the fine, almost girlish texture of my, of course, clean-shaven face, and its somewhat ironical and wily expression. Not to beat about the bush, it is a clever face. Photographers can too easily make one look a fool. I often think I resemble my father, and yet he looked both gentle and simple, whereas I look neither. To bed early with a hot water bottle. Very tired.